Hi Donovan. Believe it or not, I just subscribed to your channel a few weeks ago. I was actually listening to one of your longer episodes when this happened. So last week I visited a friend of mine who lives in Texas. I was driving to his house and it was about 4 p.m. when I left my house. His house was about 6 hours from mine. So this happened at night around 9 p.m. when I was about an hour away from his house. It was a very clear night with no clouds in the sky. As I got closer to my friend's house, I noticed that there were some trees on the side of the road that had been recently cut down. The trees were still laying on the ground, so there wasn't much room for cars to pass through without getting close to them. There was also a creek on that side of the road and a large field on the other side of the road. The field was surrounded by woods, but not as thick as they were further back from the road. I drove past the trees and then slowed down just because there wasn't that much room. As soon as I passed the trees, something jumped out in the middle of the road. It was a tall, dark figure standing, facing away from me. Whatever it was huge. I thought it was a person at first, but my headlights stopped working as soon as it jumped out in front of me. They just completely died. I didn't know if something had happened with my car or if this thing was doing something to me. I tried to turn my lights on again, but they didn't work. My car radio started making all these weird noises, and my cell phone was all scrambled and pixelated. All of these things were happening within seconds of each other, so there wasn't much time for me to react or think about what might be going on around me. The next thing that happened is this tall figure turned around and stared at me right in my car. There was enough moonlight that I could see the outline of this figure, but I couldn't make out any features. At this point, I just floored it and went straight towards this thing. I was so scared that I didn't know what else to do. I don't remember anything else until I woke up in my car. The first thing I noticed was that the sun was coming up and it was about 6 a.m. My car had stopped running and was parked on the side of the road. I tried to start my car, but it wouldn't start. It just kept turning over, but never did start. After a few minutes of trying this, I got out my USB jumper kit that I got on Amazon. Thank God I got that thing. I was able to jump start my car and I drove the next 1 hour to my friend's house. After I got my cell phone plugged in and charged, because it was completely dead, I saw that my friend had texted me 20 times and called me about a half a dozen times. I finally called him and told him what had happened. I had a screaming headache too. I'm not sure what happened that night, but I just completely blacked out after I saw that thing. What do you think this could have been? There was no damage to my car. It seemed to have some type of electrical interference or something. Anyways, I think I'll be staying out of Texas for a while. I'm a personal assistant in Waco, Texas. It is a great place to live, and if you're looking for some awesome weather and outdoor adventure, this is definitely a good place to be. The day that this happened, I was planning to do just that, head out for a hike after work. I just got done meeting with a few clients and my day ended a bit early, so I completely called it a day. I was planning to meet my friend Susan at a nearby trailhead, and we were going to do a late afternoon hike. I went back to my office and changed my clothes and called her to let her know I was ready when she was. It would take us both about 20 minutes to get to the park, and when I got there, she was already there waiting for me in the parking lot. We walked our normal loop through the park, starting off on one of our favorite trails. As I look back on it in retrospect, I remember that something didn't seem right that day. But at the time, I just pushed those thoughts out of my head and distracted myself by talking to her. She and I were in deep conversation. At one point, we stopped and looked at each other as this crazy noise cut through the air. It was a noise unlike anything either of us have ever heard before. We stood there listening for a few minutes, but when it didn't happen again, we continued on. We eventually ended up at a nice clearing and stopped to have a bite to eat. We made sure to take the trash out with us as to not litter in the area, but it always did make me nervous that opening food could attract animals to us. We continued our walk and everything was still and quiet, which was really peaceful at the time. Looking back, there were no forest sounds at all at this point, which now, knowing what I know, kind of makes sense. From there, we hiked a bit further, but made sure we didn't stay too long as it was getting close to sunset, and it would be easy to get lost in this area of the park after nightfall. We started heading back towards our car, and that's when we heard this shrill scream again. But just like before, it didn't repeat itself. Even still, the sound it made me nervous, and we picked up our pace and continued to head back the way we came. It was now dusk, and Susan pointed out what she thought might be an eagle's nest high above the trees. Luckily, I had my zoom lens with me so we could get a closer look. And sure enough, it was. She was really into looking at it, but I was still feeling creeped out by the screams that we heard, and told her I wanted to keep moving along back towards the car. So then, as we headed back, we began to smell something really foul coming from the path ahead of us. She said it was probably just a skunk, but this didn't smell like a skunk to me. It was a really foul odor. I was thinking it might be a fox, a deer, or even a coyote carcass. We made a left turn at the fork in the path when we spotted a huge dead tree. That was our landmarker that we were close and on the final path that would take us back to our cars. And this is when I really noticed that something wasn't right. I felt a change in the air, and all of the movement in the forest stopped and it got quiet. Susan also noticed it, and even made a mention of how the air seemed to change. Now my brain was getting all frazzled, and I kept thinking of the horror stories in my head. We literally started jogging at this point and reached a clearing in the woods when we heard more sounds. They were so loud and so obvious with all the other silence in the woods. But these noises sounded like branches snapping off of trees as if they were being pushed over by something coming closer to us. And that's when I saw it. Well, we both saw it. The creature stood so tall, at least a foot or two taller than us, and had this pale white skin all over its body. It had these huge black eyes that looked like someone ripped its eyeballs out of its socket, and it had this really wide mouth. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Susan grabbed me and pulled me behind a tree to hide, but it was too late. The creature had seen us and began coming towards us, but in this zombie-like stumbling way. Luckily, Susan always carries mace with her, and she aimed it and sprayed it towards this creature. It startled the creature, which reared up its head and let out this shrill scream, the exact scream that we heard before. I was completely frozen in my tracks. I was sure we were about to be attacked, but before I could say or do anything, it turned off the path and fled into the woods. Susan and I were speechless. All we could do was look at each other until she yelled "run," and we both bolted to our cars. We both later agreed that we feel we had been lucky to escape with our lives. I was never a believer in monsters before, but this changed me completely. That experience happened several years ago, and it still haunts me to this day. Susan and I still go hiking, but we haven't been back to that area since the incident. She now actually carries a pistol, and we never go hiking close to dusk or dawn. A few months back, I bought myself a drone. I'm a videographer for sporting events and weddings and birthdays, anything of that nature. I figured I could use the drone footage in various videos that I made for everybody. I even got my drone license, which you need if you're going to use the footage for commercial use. I started going around the town and got footage of the neighborhood around my house. I got office buildings and local schools, whatever I could get. Plus, it was also good practice to get an idea how to use it, how far it can go, and all that. The idea of getting all the footage was so I could have some footage ready for whatever assignment I might need it for. And I always loved those big epic shots you see in the movies. One of my friends suggested flying the drone from a trail you can drive along with your car. The trail has a beautiful panoramic view of the city. I agreed that that would be the perfect place to get some footage. The GoPro I had at the time recorded pretty well at night, so I was planning on getting some night shots as well. One weekend, she and I headed up there to get the shots. We were there from about 3 p.m. until it got dark. I had an app on my phone that streamed the drone's footage. That way I could see what was happening and maneuver it better. My friend would hold up the phone and I would handle the drone, but I did let her fly it around a little bit to get acquainted with it. It had gotten dark and my friend was handling the drone while I was holding the phone so she could see where she was going. We were talking about how to best maneuver it when she squinted her eyes and said she could see someone in the tree line far below us. I looked at the phone and was surprised to see she was right. It looked like a man wandering off the trail. We looked at each other and wondered what he was doing down there. From what we could tell, he was huge. In those days, you couldn't go too far with my drone without losing its signal, so she didn't try to go out too far to get a better look. I asked her for the drone remote, but by the time I grabbed it, the figure was gone. We started making up random stories to explain why that guy was out there. Maybe he was a hermit, or maybe he was lost, or someone living in the woods. We made plans to go out again the next weekend to get more footage of the mountain and some shots of the town, whatever interesting angles we could get. A part of me hoped that we would see that huge guy again. I wanted to see what he was up to. The next weekend rolled around, and we headed to the trail again. This time we went a little further along the trail to get a better view of the woods below. It was the same time of day as last week, and sure enough, about an hour after it got dark, we saw that strange figure again. We had a bit more range in the drone this time, so we began to track his path. Whenever he started to get out of range, we would drive a little bit further along the trail. We followed him all the way to a dead end. My friend asked if we could bring the drone closer to the man. I figured why not give it a shot. I had it hover and move slowly along the tree line below. At this point, we had lost sight of him. After about 10 minutes of searching, we found him again. He was hunched over, deeply involved in something on the ground. The picture quality wasn't the best, but he looked like he was naked. The drone hovered around him a bit. He didn't move or anything, and I tried to get a bit closer when he suddenly flinched and stood up. That's when I realized we were not looking at a human. This creature was way bigger than we previously thought. He stared down at the camera as it hovered below his head. It was pretty dark, but the feed on my phone showed something sort of like an ape, but built more like this massive weightlifter or bodybuilder. It was totally covered in hair. The more my friend and I looked at it, the more we were convinced that it wasn't a man. This thing grabbed a nearby rock and threw it at the drone with such force that it brought it down. When it hit the forest floor, the feed cut out completely. We heard a scream. Not a human scream, but more of a primal sound, like the sound you would hear from an ape, along with these stomping noises. Next we heard the sound of footsteps, like heavy thuds. Then they quickly disappeared. I had no intention of heading into the woods in the dark, especially knowing that this thing was out there. We decided instead to head home and try to retrieve the drone the next day when it was light. The next day we returned, and while hiking through the woods, there was an awful smell in the air. It was distant but distinct. After some time, we did find the drone, which had been completely destroyed. The SD card was broken, and every part of it was smashed to bits. I'm sure that no one would have believed what we saw anyway, even if we had footage of it. The footage we did have was pretty grainy, so we never saw the animal clearly, but we could tell that it was unlike any other animal that we've ever seen. If we felt our footage was proof of a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, most people would have written it off as a man or even a mutant forest animal. I've thought the same thing, but the sounds we heard were not sounds humans could easily replicate. We never bothered telling people about it, but we knew what we saw. A huge hairy figure that towered even among the trees. It was definitely not a man, but trying to tell anyone that, most people would assume that what we saw was a bear, and that our eyes had played tricks on us thinking it was larger than it really was. But what really convinced us was when we found the drone. The drone had been completely smashed into the dirt. All around it were footprints, huge footprints. The prints were similar to a man's but longer and wider than any foot I've ever seen. We know what we saw. Since that day, I've been saving up my money, hoping that that creature didn't take off to another forest, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I will get some clear footage of it someday. If you thought those stories were creepy and weird, well then check out this story right here. And don't forget to subscribe and tick that bell icon so you're notified when I release new videos. I try to release almost every single day and a few times a week on my true crime channel. The links are below.